Lovely to have you here. It's David Drapkin having a conversation with our good friend Lynn Marie Morski. How are you doing, Lynn Marie?
I'm so good, David. Always looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, we've had many good conversations, and I'm sorry we didn't get to catch up in Denver, but I hope you had a good time.
I had a great time. It was like the largest family reunion I could possibly have gone to. 4 years of the podcast, something like 100 plus guests from places like England, Australia, etc., who I've never gotten to hug in person. So it was fantastic.
I like it like a family reunion, but sometimes there's a weird uncle there. I don't know. Who was the weird uncle at the Psychedelic Science? I wonder.
Oh, yeah. I successfully avoided whoever it was, if that person was there.
Nice. The toxic meter was working. So I'd like to start off by checking into what has happened since we last spoke back in 2020. Loads has happened, but let's use Psychedelic Science and Denver almost like a petri dish. Kind of, if you could give a bit of a psychedelic union landscape assessment of kind of where are we at and where do you feel we're at, and I'd love to just play around with that experience that you took away from Denver.
Well, the heartening thing for me in Denver was that there were some federal organizations represented, maybe not on stage, but in the audience. And in addition, there was kind of a meetup set up between some psychedelic leaders and then some people who worked for SAMHSA, which is, I'm going to botch this, but like substance abuse and mental health, something, a federal task agency on that. And so the fact that this is getting to that point, I mean, a few months ago, they released the first CPT3 code for psychedelic therapy, which is a very nerdy medicine subgroup, but that tells us that like, this is happening. Medicalization is occurring. This is really exciting. And, in parallel, there were tracks for, the indigenous use and ceremonial use and religious use and personal use and decriminalization and all these other things. And I guess the most exciting thing for me was that hopefully we are getting to a point where people stop seeing this as an either or and more of a yes and. Like these can all happen, right? I think in an ideal world, not everybody, but a lot of people who have access as their like North Star want there to be a medical option that will be regulated and covered by insurance for all the people who would not be able to afford something without insurance. And great if there is also a ceremonial option and a religious option and a safe decriminalized underground option. And again, safe is the key with all of these, right? Like if we can build harm reduction into our society in many ways, then it's less of a concern of having everything just be medical. And so the fact that there were these parallel tracks is for me a good sign that we're acknowledging that this can all take place at the same time and we don't have to focus on one at the exclusion of the other.
Beautiful. And yeah, that analogy of the petri dish and this kind of family, the psychedelic ecosystems, it is a yes and. It just has to be. Like the whole lessons of prohibition is that it doesn't work. The war on drugs has succeeded, but it's been a horrific disaster in its success of prohibiting drugs. And I went to a conference in Toronto a year or two ago, from research to reality, and they had some First Nations chiefs and tribes represented there. Really beautiful diversity and inclusion, and they had some DEA, I don't want to use the word agents, but representatives, and I was at an after party with one, and I just had so much like anger and resistance come up, and I was like, well, she's actually talking really awesome stuff about what they're trying to do and taking a fresh approach. And I think some of us have to get over our just anger,
yes,
and animosity and distrust. And it might take a wee while, but that's beautiful that SAMHSA was there especially. And yeah, we're on the brink of seeing MDMA, we all assume, probably in about 12 months' time. So we've just got to kind of accept that this is going to be massively commercial and medical. I wanted to say congratulations for being on News Nation. For your second time. I just watched the clip today, actually. So it was funny. I just got to see it. So, you had like a couple of minutes and the broadcaster was just hurrying you along, Dr. Morski. And so it was great. Completely novice person and kind of, I assume, a novice and mildly skeptical audience is there. So what was that like, just being on live TV talking about psychedelic stuff for a couple minutes?
Well, it's funny because if you look at these two clips, I now have them both on my LinkedIn. And if you look on my LinkedIn, they're side by side. And on both of them, instead of my name at the bottom, in identifying who I am, it says like Aaron Rodgers discusses psychedelic use on both of them. So it's really just comical to me that like this is why, we're paying attention to it. It's really a struggle for me because, I knew nothing about Aaron Rodgers because I'm not a sports person, despite my sports medicine is my actual, medicine training. But all I knew about Aaron Rodgers is that he had like been very shady about whether he'd been vaccinated. And so when News Nation first asked me about a year ago to come on and talk about his use of psychedelics, it really was like a minute of, I even put this on Instagram, guys, do I do this? I don't want to give this person any more airtime, but the thought, the realization is somebody's going to do this clip. And, this is part of the responsibility is to preach to the not choir, right? Like that's the whole point of the Psychedelic Medicine Association is to get clinicians who've never heard about psychedelics informed on psychedelics. So absolutely going on News Nation is a key part of getting to that, that demographic. But it's just almost comical at this point because, this shadiness about vaccines was after he had done ayahuasca. And so, I think people paint with this brush of like, oh, ayahuasca is going to change your whole life, make you a healed, enlightened person. It is not, guys. Like, hopefully anybody listening to your podcast knows that at this point. But excuse me. But it's really like it is nice to get on and to be able to have, like you said, with an audience that isn't used to it. We spend so much time in our little psychedelic bubble talking to people who know all the ins and outs. So to get to speak to a completely fresh audience. And what I liked about this most recent interview was that she asked, Schedule 1 drugs are supposedly no medical value and high potential for addiction. Why should these not be Schedule 1? That's my favorite question to answer. I'd say one, at least top 3 questions. And so that really made me excited because that, to get to debunk a massive myth to that segment of the population who may not have, who may still be, under the influence of the war on drugs and Just Say No and the DARE campaign, who may still think that there's no medical use and they're super addictive. That really did make me happy. So yeah, it's getting easier. The first time I did the live segment, my little Aura ring showed that my heart rate was like 135, like I was mid-marathon or something. And
Wow.
And this time, that didn't happen, but instead my ring light went out halfway through like a 4-minute interview. So it was like, whoa, something totally bad happened on live TV. Not totally bad, but the kind of
and two different types of ring as well. Your
right.
Aura ring and your ring light as well.
And yeah, so I was like, okay, I have dealt with, at least like nothing crashed and the power didn't go out or whatever. But, to have made through a live segment with something kind of quasi major happening and still surviving, it's, I'm building confidence in doing this. We'll say that much.
Yeah, thanks for doing it. Honestly, I think preaching to the non-quiet is exactly where we need to be. It's what you do at PMA, Psychedelic Medicine Association, and the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast. So you've got an amazing energy, I have noticed. I would call you a dynamo. What kind of, have you always had that energy? And it just seems like you say yes. Was it like, Lynn Marie, can you do this for us? And I saw you once post on socials, like, oh, I just got asked to do this, short notice webinar, and I'm at my parents' house, and I'll just put the laptop on the floor and do it in the bedroom. And you just said yes to that. It's like, what is that energy that you've got? Like, has it always been there? And why is it now really kind of getting so far behind the psychedelic medicine movement?
That's a very interesting question that I've never been asked before. Yeah, I was actually at my own home, but I had just moved in and I had no desk assembled. This is when Johns Hopkins asked me to give a webinar for their master's in health program or something. And so I did that from my floor. It's there's two separate things going on there, which is one, how to have the energy, and two, and this is what I kind of alluded to with the live interview, which is getting over your own perfectionism. And I think the more, I was born, let's just call this out. I was born in 1977, right? I grew up when things had to be perfect before social media and the internet. And now things can be a hot mess and nobody seems to care, right? So that has been very helpful. Like my light goes on in live TV, whatever, we've seen mistakes happen all the time. You see a typo in every other news headline, right? Like info is coming out so quickly that perfectionism has had to go by the wayside, which is actually very helpful for me. It's like I didn't have to have a perfect desk setup. I could do this from the floor. But energy wise, there are things in life, and I have done many of them, where if you saw me doing them, you would think, wow, she is at like her energy meter is zero. And I'll be very honest that doctoring is one of them, seeing patients in person. And I think that's why, like, I have a book out there somewhere on it's called Quitting by Design, but it's about quitting things that aren't working for you. And I think that is a real telltale really a telltale sign, is like what gives you energy and what depletes you of energy. I was not meant to be a clinician who sees people patients one-on-one, because it would just completely deplete my energy. But if you say to me, we're going to have a day where you have to be on a different podcast every hour, or speaking at Johns Hopkins or on News Nation, I would have energy level 110 for the whole thing, because this is what gives me energy. So I think, luckily when I've moved to psychedelics, that's when you and I got to know each other. You haven't seen me like struggling through a day at the VA or something like that. And I think also another part of it is that, like, I did practice at the VA for 9 years. I was a practicing doctor all total for like 15 years. And the amount of energy that it gave me to leave that and to be able to do now something that I feel super passionate about, but in a way that I also like, I'm not seeing patients as a psychedelic therapist, right? That could be, that could have been with my, with my credentials, I could have moved into that. I probably would have the same reaction, like I'm not a one-on-one person. So the fact that I get to be behind the scenes and doing this and spreading the word in this way that gives me energy has been an entirely, life-changing shift for me. So I think that's what you're seeing.
Far out. And I'm curious just to take what you said there. Have psychedelics help with that in your own life? Because you just talked about realizing we don't need to be perfect. I think psychedelics often teach us that. We kind of come to love all of our complexity and imperfections in different parts and shadow sides. And that it helps us to find what we love, to embrace that, and to connect with what really deeply means something to us. So for me, definitely psychedelics have helped with that and are still helping me kind of work through those two things. But has that been part of your journey as well?
Well, I would say and this is, I probably told this story before, but in case I haven't, I didn't use a lot of psychedelics before, and still, I don't use a lot of them now, but I had never microdosed prior to 2019, and I was still at the VA, and by the way, you could, like, at the time, I still didn't know what a microdose amount was of psilocybin, right? So I was on vacation at a friend's house, and he said, do you want a microdose? And I didn't ask amounts or, anything. So I take this and we go snowshoeing, and I noticed nothing. But of course, subperceptual, shouldn't have noticed anything. So well done microdosing. But I recall, like, even taking some more later in the day, and then we went rock climbing and I still felt nothing. And I remember on the way home from that, I said, I felt nothing all day. And he makes this statement. He said, I tend to feel it 48 hours later. And my whole doctor brain kicked in, and it was like, metabolism wise, that doesn't seem to make any sense. All this, like, I knew nothing. Right. And if you're doing the math, this is like 3 months before I launched the podcast. So I learned a lot in like 3 months. But anyway, when he said that, I noted it, but just kind of tucked it away. And after I came back from visiting that friend, I went to work at the VA. I had gotten an email saying, like, you didn't do a great job on this one patient encounter. And I'd been there 9 years. And I would routinely get, like, there was just the entire department I worked for was kind of toxic. They were always just trying to kind of critique people in a million ways. And I remember getting so anxious that I was in tears. And I had to stop and realize, like, you're in tears over a job, the possibility of losing a job that you have hated every second of, because, like, I went to law school to try to get out of medicine. I wrote a book to try to get out of medicine. I was trying everything to get out of medicine, but I couldn't do it. Kind of golden handcuff situation. And that night I go home and I cry for like 12 hours straight. And this is one email, right? This is not a normal reaction. And so it's like 2 a.m. I'm talking to a friend in Sweden because nobody else is up. And I'm like, why am I still crying? And then all of a sudden it hits me. It's like 48 hours after I took that microdose. And it was just so clear that, like, this little microdose was showing me basically what my soul was doing all the time, right? Like, your soul is just constantly crying about this terrible, toxic job that you feel you can't leave, et cetera, et cetera. And that really, wow, that like turned things around for me, where I was like, I need to get out, because I'd been giving, on the book that I had about quitting, I was giving all these talks to doctors about, if your mental health is suffering, quit that doctor job. Well, the whole time my mental health was suffering and I was still in that same job. I was not taking my own advice. And this was kind of like a little psychedelic gift saying, like, hey, take your own advice, do whatever you need to do, get out of there. And so, within 2 months, I was out of the VA. So that's specifically how psychedelics helped me make that shift, for sure.
Far out. Thank you. I hadn't heard that story before. I love it. Thanks for sharing. So Psychedelic Medicine Association, PMA as we know and love it. That evolved soon after that. Where did you get that initial thought of, I need to do this, or this isn't happening, it needs to do this, XYZ? Like, talk us through that kind of genesis process.
Absolutely. So, as I said, I was working at the VA, and I'm seeing at the point that I left, I had done ayahuasca about a year and a half before. And I was thinking, like, this is so sad. Every person that I see coming through the VA could probably benefit from ayahuasca. But since I'm a, Department of Defense contractor, I can't tell them about it. I can't tell anybody I've done it. I'd be fired. And I thought, like, really, there's plenty of things out there talking about psychedelics to patients, to like this, the lay public, and very few that are speaking to clinicians. But who do most people, your average American, not the ones who are, in liberal cities that are at their integration circles, we're talking like my parents, middle of America, Southern Illinois, where do they go to get their information about medical conditions and treatments? Their physician, their primary care provider. And I was like, it is going to be my mission to spread the word of psychedelics to that population, because as you and I know, we are both, medical professionals of some sort, right? We listen to our own, right? I know you're a therapist, and if somebody comes along and tries to tell you how to be a therapist who isn't a therapist, it's a different conversation than when somebody with your same training, your same background comes along. And I thought, well, if that could be where I'm useful, clearly I'm not cut out to be a doctor who sees patients. Like, I just know that. But if the point of me being a doctor can be to spread this to other doctors and they'll listen because I'm one of them, great. Now there's a purpose that I've gone through this. And so that's when I started the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast, which was called the Plant Medicine Podcast at the time, thinking like, I'm not an expert in these by any means. How am I going to educate people while I'm not an expert? Well, I had a podcast on the quitting thing already. And so I thought, I'll start a podcast. I will interview people so that I will learn while spreading information to everybody else. But then that was, I launched in August of 2019, and I realized, like, your average doctor does not have 45 minutes to sit down and listen to a podcast on psilocybin for depression to find out whether or not it works, right? They go to their inbox, they get little bites from, places that keep them updated. And it was at that point that, a friend of mine said, you need to start an association. And I was like, that's true. Like, if I start an association and people opt in, and then I could send them, updates in their inbox that they can read between patients. They won't have to listen to a 45-minute podcast. I'll say, here's the 5, 6, most recent findings in psychedelic science, the most important things that are clinically relevant, right? Like some EKG or EEG findings, they might be interesting, but what's clinically relevant to you as a clinician? That's what we, send out every month. So that's how it got started, is that I was like, how do I get to clinicians? It's very important that we get to clinicians, especially the ones that have no idea about psychedelics, and how do we get them information quickly, succinctly, and get them just the information that'll be useful.
And you've done it.
I hope so. I mean, I guess I have started an association, and it is almost 3 years old. I think kind of my biggest hesitation in saying that I've done it is that my target market, like I keep saying, are the doctors, nurses, PAs, et cetera, who have no idea psychedelic medicine exists. But it is a marketing challenge to get people to join an association to learn about a thing they don't know exists, right? Like, that is if we had millions of dollars in marketing, maybe I could pull this off. But like, if I have got people in the PMA who otherwise were pretty much completely naive about psychedelics, then yes, I have, quote unquote, done it. But I think, still, like, the mission continues. And I will feel like when we have people showing up saying, I actually didn't know anything about psychedelic medicine, thought they were harmful, thought they were addictive, thought they had thought they should be Schedule 1, and then they joined the PMA, and now they feel comfortable enough to have a conversation with their patients about the therapeutic use of psychedelics, then I will feel like mission accomplished.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess, if we're being honest, probably haven't scratched the surface, have we, of everyone that needs to know a little bit of facts and reality about psychedelics and what's happening and what they should know in order to support patients. Yeah, probably less than 5% of America, or let alone the rest of the world, but of the healthcare professions knowing about actually what the reality is. It's really the vast minority. So it's good to kind of preach to that non-choir yet again.
Yeah. And here's my humble plea. If anybody out there happens to have connections at, we need to be in front of the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American Psychiatric Association, and I know that sometimes they do have, I think APA might have recently had like Robin Carhart Harris and some other people speak, which is a great start. The more we can get psychedelic scientists in front of these larger conferences of the non-choir, in front of the anesthesiologist. Like I recall, I'm on the ketamine task force board, and they were talking about how to get ketamine covered by insurance. There's no current code that covers ketamine. And at some point in time, it came like anesthesiologists were blocking this or something. And so like lack of knowledge can not only be just, unfortunate there's ignorance, it can actually be counterproductive to us getting access to these. And so we need to get in front of all the different types of medical specialties. And so, like if anybody has connections to those larger specialties, please find me and, see what we can do about getting in front of them, because it really is, like you said, we barely scratched the surface. And it's not just primary care physicians and psychiatrists. Like we want the ER docs to know that when somebody shows up and they're having an issue from a psychedelic, like this is not a call the police situation. This is a, if you know about psychedelic harm reduction, you're going to have a whole different reaction to this. And so, yeah, we have much more surface to scratch, as you said.
And maybe let's just talk about who can join the PMA. So I am a paid member. I pay my dues every year. I come to the webinars every month. I get my newsletters every month, and I've got a profile on the directory, so I'm up there. I'm a social worker, just in case you didn't know, folks, whoever's listening. Who can join? Like, who is it actually for? Like, what kinds of practitioners and credentials, and is it open to?
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that, because it is open to anybody who has basically a license to practice any kind of clinical skill. And so the reason I'm having even a hard time describing it is because if you have a license to do acupuncture, if you have a license to, social work, therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a doctor, nurse practitioner, nurse, it's a very wide range. But we want, there's two things here. There's two sides of whenever you're trying to decide who do you let in. We want obviously the most possible people in, while still being able to narrow our focus enough that when we do provide these webinars, that they are applicable to the people watching, right? If you have everybody show up, it's really hard to narrow and really serve one segment, which is the clinician segment, which is our target. But on the other hand, we did want to find some kind of way to gatekeep. And so it literally, just so that we could be serving clinicians only. And also, I'm sure back at the beginning of the pandemic, if anybody was on these, very large Zoom calls that we'd have all the time, the chat would just get like crazy with different, it was kind of like being at Psychedelic Science, right? We got like, well, an indigenous concern would come up, and then a ceremonial, and then a religious and whatever. And it's like really hard to address all these. And so we are, have a clinician focus at this point. So we limit it to clinicians, but we also wanted to have as many clinicians as possible, because anybody that a patient goes to with a health concern, and I, sometimes say physical, sometimes say mental, but they're all the same, right? Like whose acid reflux isn't somehow affected by their stress, right? Like there's so many overlays, and there's so many psychedelic applications for physical things like cluster headaches and chronic pain, that anybody that a patient is going to with any kind of health concern, I want them to be aware of what psychedelic options are available. You go to your Reiki practitioner, Reiki isn't working enough. I want them to be able to say, hey, we've heard that this, ketamine might help for the thing you're doing, or if they're in Oregon, psilocybin might help, or if they want somebody to go elsewhere, ayahuasca. But I want that to be the case if you show up to your therapist with that same concern, you show up to your social worker, your nurse practitioner, your acupuncturist, your doctor, all of them. I want them all to be aware and feel comfortable having that conversation.
Beautiful. So we're going to need to take a little while to get there, maybe a decade or so, I'm thinking at least. But just imagine that, where psychedelic medicine is a respected and kind of normalized part of the treatment menu that we have when we go to a clinic or a hospital wellness center. I can't wait for that to happen. And psychedelics are different, so you do need different kinds of approaches and trainings around it. And at the same time, that's just another way of healing. And you mentioned, Lynn Marie, something I think is super important around psychedelics is I feel like they could well be the bridge that we need as a society and culture around kind of more mind, body, integrative, holistic, multidisciplinary approaches to understanding sickness, health, wellness, and just human beingness. So I feel like if we can bring psychedelics into our culture in a responsible way, we can also educate not only healthcare providers but patients themselves, just to understand, like you said, acid reflux in a slightly different way. Because yes, we have a body and a brain, and they are connected, but we've also got, emotions and I believe energy as well. I think looking at energy is a really important part of, what connects us as beings and consciousness itself. So I feel like psychedelics may well be a little kind of key that opens that kind of new paradigm, dare I say, of just understanding, health and life. And we've become so detached from that as technology and craziness has taken over our lives. And psychedelics help us just kind of literally to turn that off.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate that. And you just said, okay, like maybe in 10 years we'll get there. I think I've discussed this with you before, which is my dream is for, I'm also a lawyer, right? So I think in kind of simultaneous terms. And malpractice is always there in the background. And right now, the big question is like, is it malpractice for me to mention psychedelics to my patients? And I envision a future where it's malpractice not to, where you are keeping that information. Like imagine somebody comes to you as a psychiatrist and you're depressed and they don't mention antidepressants. Like, that would, if that person wanted to complain later, they'd have a very, strong leg to stand on because that is the gold standard. But, with these PTSD findings, phase 3, proving, showing what they have, imagine, in 10 years, somebody goes to their psychiatrist with severe PTSD, nothing else has worked, and that psychiatrist still doesn't recommend MDMA, assuming that it is FDA approved. Like that's going to have to be malpractice, and that's the future that I envision. And absolutely, I totally agree that I think we've been getting there. We have been acknowledging more of this mind body spiritual connection little by little. With everything in society, it's taking some time, but I do think that this could be a big lever in in making that switch. And the Psychedelic Medicine Association, last night on our webinar, we had the topic psychedelics for burnout and healthcare professionals. And I think really once we get the healthcare professionals to start utilizing psychedelics for their own healing, when you have that realization for yourself, things are completely different, right? You can hear about it in theory. Oh, I hear that MDMA is good for PTSD. When you experience it, psychedelic healing for yourself and the difference that mind body connection makes even in your own life, I think that's going to help start, like you said, increase that awareness so that something isn't just a purely mental or a physical condition, that really everything is kind of interrelated. I share that same vision.
Yeah. And the most powerful marketing ploy, if it is a ploy, is healthcare workers having their own experiences with psychedelics for healing. So I totally agree with that. And anyone having an experience with psychedelics is often, if it's a good experience and a helpful one, it's been approached in the right way, to hear them then speak about it, and for them to tell their folks at work by the water cooler, or their mum and dad, as I've done with my parents. Like, oh, okay, David, all right then, it's very normalizing, and to see it has helped. These are really helpful, and I think frontline workers have such a difficult job. And why is it okay that they can have loads of meds, but these other medicines that are even more effective are not legal? And going back to the VA, how many meds on average does the average veteran have?
Right.
I would guess like somewhere between like 5 and 10.
Yeah.
Having worked with a lot of vets, they are so over medicated. And so from the vets I've worked with and know of in psychedelics, getting them off the meds is a massive emotional and kind of biological and neurological feat to get them off the meds, and then to try something new. And just veterans can't even smoke cannabis for most of them, having worked in addiction treatment. That's just because they get tested, and so they just stay on the medications, and they're not working, so they take some more medications, and they don't work, so they take more.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see what this world looks like. I know we've made strides, right? There are some industries that are no longer testing for cannabis. I think sports industries that used to. I don't know if sports industry is a word, but
like NHL,
yeah,
NFL,
exactly,
and
right.
NBA,
sports organizations that no longer test, and I hope that because that was a question that I brought up in our panel last night, because I've been on different kind of doctor calls where a lot of the physicians were scared to share their own psychedelic use for fear of, we have medical boards that we respond to, right? I also have the California bar, right? Like I'm beholden to multiple organizations that have to say, like, you are a fit person to have our credentials, and should it get out that I do this and that, like what effect does that have? I even said, like, if physicians are in these studies right now, the University of Washington is having a psilocybin for, frontline healthcare, depression, and burnout. Well, are these clinicians allowed to do psilocybin? This is, it's like, what if it shows up in their VA drug test that they, supposedly can get? That's a real issue. And so, like you said, a lot of these kind of larger structural things also have to change. And hopefully, like you said, the more we share the stories and the science, I think stories plus science is kind of the secret sauce in getting this across. Either one by itself is okay, but when you combine the two, hopefully we have enough societal change. I mean, we've seen it with cannabis, like I said, with the people who stop testing. There's enough, proof and legalization and all those things that has some beneficial properties. So that's helped. Let's hope that with psychedelics we see the same, and so then we can decrease the stigma, and like especially in those people who have to answer to a higher, medical board, et cetera, that they'll feel more comfortable doing it.
Yeah. And I want to talk more with you about the big picture, the systems, the scaling, how it all works, the safeguards, things like that. But before we move on, I want to hear about the new course that you're offering at the PMA. So I've seen it's called Managing Medical Risk in Patients Seeking Psilocybin Therapy.
Rolls right off.
What's it all about? Tell us about it.
The longest title.
I know, that's why I thought I'd write it down, so in case you didn't remember it. I just thought I'll say it instead.
It's a very likely that I would not remember it. I would leave out one of those words.
I'm that kind of podcast host. Yeah.
So helpful, David. Yeah. Managing medical risk in patients seeking psilocybin therapy. Yes. So this, and for the doctors out there, or, maybe you've been a patient, and David and I did this course for this chat for Vital, where we likened, I love the chat we had, but we likened psychedelics to more of like spiritual surgery, because a lot of times we think about treatments as medicine, right? You take one of these, two of these, you call me in the morning, right? But actually you take two of those every morning, and you probably don't call a doctor for a number of months. Maybe you get a refill. Whereas psychedelics, we know, is something you do 1, 2, 3 times, perhaps, maybe ketamine 6, but it's more of a one-off or two-off with therapy before and after and integration. And it's a whole different paradigm that's much more like surgery. And if we're just using, I had ACL surgery 10 years ago, torn ACL in the left knee. Before I could go into surgery, I have to go see anesthesia, and they're the ones who do the clearance, and they're going to make sure that my heart is healthy enough to undergo anesthesia and surgery. They're going to make sure my blood pressure is good. All of those things. That's what our course is trying to do. Now, in surgery, it's called a clearance because we've had surgery for so many years that we can tell pretty well. We've got great guidelines on, okay, if your blood pressure is under this, you can do surgery. If your heart rate looks like this, you can do surgery. Psychedelic science is still evolving. So we don't have enough information to make these clear guidelines of this is an absolute clearance for you to do this. So that's why we're calling it managing medical risk, because we want clinicians to be able to do a risk assessment. So imagine this, you're in Oregon. Once these doors open, people can come in, get their psilocybin therapy. An entire state worth of people are going to be wondering, can I and should I do psilocybin therapy? And imagine, a lot of us, we are, able-bodied, healthy. We don't have maybe a lot of medical conditions. We think, oh, great, well, psilocybin's open. But imagine a more medically complicated patient. Maybe they have a seizure disorder. Maybe they're on lithium. Maybe they have a first-degree relative with schizophrenia, or they themselves have had bipolar disorder episodes. They may be wondering, is it safe for me to do? And so a huge part of harm reduction in like something like a state rollout of psilocybin therapy is having that state's primary care providers equipped with the knowledge of how to have that conversation with those patients and perform that medical risk assessment. And when I say medical, I mean both physiologically and psychologically. So in our course, we start and by the way, we realize that a lot of primary care providers, and I'm going to continue to refer to Oregon, but first off, the course is useful for anybody trying to do a psilocybin risk assessment for anyone, anywhere in the world. Say you are a doctor in the Netherlands and you have somebody who wants to fly to Jamaica for psilocybin. Absolutely, this clearance will help you make that risk assessment. And anybody in the USA, this is CME and CE certified. So for clinicians. But the reason that I keep saying Oregon is like right now this is applicable, right? As soon as they open their doors, a state worth of PCPs are going to need to know about psilocybin, and they may not know anything, right? And so we start at the beginning of the course just giving some general things about psilocybin, a little bit on its general, mechanism of action, pharmacology, what we know from the fMRI studies, and then we go into some of the researched indications, because if the patient shows up saying, "Hey doc, I've got depression and an eating disorder, et cetera," we want the doctor to say, yes, that has been researched and psilocybin does seem to be useful, or no, there isn't any research on that, or maybe it's found to have no effect, right? And then we get into a little bit on actually what Oregon looks like, because if you're a doctor and your patient comes to you and says, I want to do the psilocybin therapy, and you haven't even heard about this rollout. I mean, I don't live in Oregon. I don't know what kind of press it gets, but there's some possibility that you've never heard of it. And so we want the doctors to feel comfortable knowing, okay, if I say yes, if I say medically you seem safe for this, I want them to know what they're getting into. And so Sam Chapman from Healing Advocacy Fund, and who is also from Measure 109, he wrote our section on, he and Heidi Pendergrast from Healing Advocacy Fund wrote our section on what Oregon looks like on the ground. Like, you have to be this certain age, the facilitators have this certain background, all of those kinds of things, just to give the doctors some background so they can feel comfortable saying, yes, this seems like an okay thing for you to do. And then we get into the indications into the contraindications. And that is the actual assessment of a person's medical and physical medical and physical mental health and mental health for whether they would be a good, safe candidate for psilocybin therapy. And this is where we get some caveats, which is, like I said, this is still evolving, right? A lot of conditions have been left out of trials. Schizophrenia is a great example. Nobody with schizophrenia has been allowed in any psilocybin trial previous to like a month ago. I heard that now we've got our first trial that's being done with people who have schizophrenia. Great, fantastic. We have a trial now going on with people who have bipolar disorder. Also, they had previously been left out of trials. And so that's kind of the issue, is that if we haven't studied these populations, we don't know whether or not it is safe for them. And so right now, the guidelines we have are more on the conservative side. But we still have these guidelines, right? And then even down to like, what does your liver function look like? What does your kidney function look like, right? Psilocybin is a relatively safe drug, but it will raise your heart rate a little. It'll raise your blood pressure. So what does your cardiovascular status look like? And so we go through all of those things. And then we also go through drug-drug interactions, medication interactions. I'm on such and such medication. Can I do psilocybin therapy? Is it safe? What effect might the psilocybin have? Or what might, like say, an SSRI have on my outcomes with psilocybin therapy. And so that's what our course, Managing Medical Risk in Patients Seeking Psilocybin Therapy, is designed to address. We want to arm primary care providers across, primarily right now, Oregon, but like I said, Colorado will be next. And then this is applicable to anybody who has patients going anywhere for psilocybin therapy. And then the last thing I'll say about the course is that if you are a clinician and you take the course, you have the option to opt into what we have created, which is a psilocybin-informed clinicians directory. Because imagine you are a patient in Oregon and you want to go to a primary care physician to say, is it safe for me? But how do you know who's going to know that? And that's why we created the directory. We want patients to know where they can go. And this is another thing for, safety kind of everywhere, is that unfortunately, certain, let's say, socioeconomic or underserved classes, if they go to a provider and they state that they want to use what is federally an illegal substance, this may get their children taken away. This may get the police called. This is absolutely the opposite of harm reduction, and we don't want this happening. So if we have clinicians that are informed on psilocybin therapy who will not be making those inappropriate calls, then this is a safer place, hopefully, for these patients to go to. They'll get the information they need. They won't get scrutiny that they don't deserve. And so anybody who takes the course has the option to opt into that directory. And just one last thing is that anybody who takes the course is automatically, they become a member of the Psychedelic Medicine Association, so that when things update, like when we get the results from the bipolar trial, when we get the results from the schizophrenia trial, we can update on whether or not those are still contraindications. If it turns out psilocybin's great for those, we want those providers to know. We don't want to make a directory of clinicians who have one point in time of information and not the evolution of that information. And so that's how we're going to keep that database up to date on the latest.
That's amazing. Yeah. And one aspect of this is we still don't know a lot, and we're kind of still affected a lot by prohibition and the lack of research that has been allowed, and the conservatism. So it's great that you're going to be updating that, because there will be just a huge amount of new data that comes out. And as we start to open the minds of practitioners to psychedelics, then they've got to know like what's safe and what's not safe. And I love the piece you said before that in the years to come, practitioners that don't recommend and talk about psychedelics as an option, that's malpractice, that's liability. So doing this kind of course is exactly what PMA is stepping in to offer, because like how to convert that kind of highfalutin ivory tower research that was kind of randomized controlled trials, double blind, all that stuff, into just like, oh, I've got this man or woman sitting in front of me, and I'm doing their blood test and checking their heart rate and all that stuff, and I don't have a clue what to do. I don't know what to say legally, medically. I just don't know what to say, and I want to help this person, but I don't want to get in trouble, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. So that's a really complex, and I've been in that space, and that's really why I left the space of addiction treatment, because I just couldn't work there anymore and not offer them psychedelic treatment, because they had so much trauma and been in and out of rehab so many times. It's like, what am I going to offer them that they haven't already tried? And psychedelics are new and they're different and they require a lot of education. So love that you're doing it. And I'm also thinking, Lynn Marie, I don't know how you want to play this answer, but this course that you've built, which is a bit of a tongue twister, and you did great to say it, this course is actually open maybe to anyone. So folks that are working in the underground, this potentially could help. Just this kind of information, put it that way, this kind of information can really help to know, can I work with this person? And there's a lot of wisdom in the underground that's been built up over the last 50 years since Prohibition was put down there. So this kind of knowledge and this formal process, the kind of standards of care, just having that available in the underground, at retreat centres, in the Western kind of formal medical system, it belongs there. It keeps people safe. It gives practitioners more knowledge, more competence and skills to really help people make their own decisions and to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like, and there's, I always see these. Ali Fadouche had posted something lovely about, training on LinkedIn, and a medical doctor had commented something like, no, we should just do it how the indigenous did. And I think like, well, the indigenous didn't have to know whether or not and, like say they're talking thousands of years ago, they didn't have somebody coming to them on Lexapro, right? Like we cannot take today's patients and just solely apply indigenous knowledge. That, things have to evolve. Like absolutely we should use all the, learn from the practices, but there have to be some specific things tailored to the current medical patient. And also, back thousands of years ago, we didn't have a way to check a blood pressure or a heart rate. So we also don't have a tally of how many people had adverse events because their heart wasn't in the shape to do it, right? So I think that like combining those, like you said, the underground wisdom with what we're learning from the medical world is 100% the best way to provide the best outcome for patients, right? Like if we can enrich their experience through, ceremonial traditions while also reducing as much harm through, this kind of medical screening process, that can just benefit, the patient more than anything than just one of the two by itself.
Yeah. And often in the psychedelic industry, we speak about the bottleneck around training of therapists and practitioners. I feel like there's another bottleneck more around this kind of thing, this course that you've got, the standards of care, the clinical practice guidelines, REMS, risk evaluation, mitigation strategies, ethics, codes of conduct, screening tools and protocols, the stuff that ain't so sexy, that's not going to get a VC company to throw $1 million at you. But without that, how the hell are we going to build this? And in a sense have some standards, and you can still deviate from the standards if it improves practice or makes it more kind of relevant and targeted towards certain demographic populations or client needs. But you need foundations, and we don't really have that yet as an industry. So we've got to bloody start somewhere. So this course is awesome. Any other examples of this when we're thinking about clinical practice guidelines, REMS, codes of conduct, screening tools that you're seeing, or people that are trying to build this out?
Yeah. And this is both like my absolute passion and like the largest pain point currently. Like you said, to be very honest, the PMA is not a nonprofit, so we have no donations and we have no VC dollars. Every dollar that we have is because a member signed up and paid. And that, we have almost 1,200 members, but we also give it free to every nonprofit and to every student and to everybody who can't pay. So, maybe, half or a third to half of those are paying members. So our budget is limited for these things, where you're absolutely right. There needs to be significant more investment to this portion, because I think it's a complete, like you said, it is not sexy and it is a massive blind spot. Like I think maybe there was one panel in Psychedelic Science that talked about REMS or, CPT codes or any, like, this is where we're focused, right? Like, and I think that kind of the reason that we don't look at it so often is that we already know that there are so many patients suffering and so many patients who know about it and who've been going to underground or who've been signing up for clinical trials in droves, that it gets left out, the fact that when we spread this to other places and try to get widespread acceptance, there are going to be a lot of other steps between, right? And so specifically what the Psychedelic Medicine Association is working on is educating generally the population who will be referring to psychedelic therapists. So, we're not telling your average primary care physician that we want to train you on how to be a psychedelic therapist. Absolutely not. We want to teach that PCP enough to maybe do the clearance, hopefully do that clearance on the psilocybin, but then to how to refer. Now let's use ketamine, because ketamine is legal everywhere in the US. So if a primary care physician or a psychiatrist doesn't know about ketamine right now as an antidepressant or as a mental health thing, already that is unfortunate, because it's been shown to be so effective for depression, so effective for suicidality. So first, the PMA is trying to educate them on, okay, ketamine exists. Here's the uses. Please tell your patients about it. But then here's the crucial step that really gets missed, is that then that doctor, let's just say doctors for ease of use here, is going to want to make a referral. If instead of referring to a ketamine clinic, I as a primary care doctor, I'm trying to refer to a cardiologist, the way that I will feel safe doing so, both safe knowing that my patient's going to be safe and safe for my own malpractice, is that I'm referring to a board certified cardiologist, right? This cardiologist might have bad bedside manner or be overflowing with patients or whatever, but the bare minimum is that I know that they are board certified. I know that means that they've done a cardiology, probably internal medicine residency, a cardiology fellowship, then they took their cardiology board exam and passed and have kept their certification up. I know all of that just by knowing they're board certified. If I instead am trying to refer to a ketamine clinic, there is no equivalent of that. There is no such thing as a board certified ketamine practitioner. That practitioner might be a board certified anesthesiologist, but some of these are run by PAs or NPs or whatever. Like, it's a whole realm of different licensed people, and there is no specific license for this person knows how to administer ketamine in a therapeutic way. Now, I know that there's a group called Rainfall Medicine and they have a training course on that, but it's not like a nationally, like, I don't know that like there's a equivalent. Like, if they pass Rainfall, at least I know they've taken a course, right? Or that they've done that course, but there isn't some national certification that says this provider knows how to dose ketamine, how to do a clearance for ketamine, how to keep you safe, all of these things. So as a primary care provider, I'm not going to feel terribly comfortable referring to ketamine solely because I don't know who is a quality ketamine practitioner. And this is happening right now. This isn't even when MDMA and psilocybin and all those are options. This is right now. And so the fact that we don't have that is really making even our job at the PMA hard, because we're like, please refer to ketamine practitioners when you have a patient who's not doing well on their antidepressants. And then the response will be, how do I know which one is good? And that's why we do have, organizations have joined the PMA. We have a number of ketamine clinics who have joined the PMA, and then they're in our directory. And still, that doesn't mean that they're great. It does mean that they're getting our education, and hopefully that does translate to them actually having safer practices. But there's no guarantee. And so that's what's really, really hard in this right now, is that even when, like, say, MDMA becomes FDA approved, there's going to be a REMS which says, like, yeah, I've done this training and et cetera. But and that's for the provider, the actual person writing the prescription. But how do we know that the therapist is good? Well, they should probably have had the MAPS therapy training. Okay, well, then that's a check mark, right? Like, there's so many different things that a provider is going to have to know this is really going to be complicated and 100% unsexy, like you said, right? This is getting in the nitty gritty. And this is where I'm so focused on, but there just aren't like, there isn't one group specifically focused on that, right? Like APA was focused on making the standards of training, which meant that they were going to decide which training programs will qualify a person to then take the board exam. And then the board is supposed to make the board exam. But at this point, neither of those things have happened. And we're, like you said, maybe 12 months, maybe a little longer away from this, MDMA assisted psychotherapy being out and available. And we're behind. Everything is behind in this. And so that's a huge concern of mine. If somebody out there knows how to like get that, because we have our focus. We're trying to educate the clinicians, but it's not one of our arms is to like work on getting a CPT code or working on like other organizations have stepped up and said that they're going to do that. So we are just, we have our big enough chunk that we're trying to work on teaching people how to do the clearance and all that, but absolutely getting a safe base of people to refer to for these therapies is going to be crucial.
Wow. Okay.
Right.
Good luck to us. Good luck. We are brave souls. And yeah, I think I interviewed Amanda Fielding in a Breaking Convention back in April, and she was saying, she's devoted her life to this, 50, 60 years to psychedelic kind of normalization. And she said, yeah, we are just at the foothills now. After all this work, we're literally at the foothills, still staring up at this massive peak summit that we've got to get to. And yeah, I think in a sense, MDMA medicalization is a summit, and we've got 12 months to get from the foothills. So we're in sprint mode, basically sprinting up a mountain right now in a bit of a blizzard. So anyway, I did have a question. So you're a child of 77, as you said earlier. I'm a child of 78. So we're children of the 70s. I love that we were born in the 70s. It's great.
We're Zennials. That's a thing. Look it up.
Ah, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll be that. I don't know when you went to med school, did your residency training, but I want to ask, what did you learn about cannabis and psychedelics there? And if it's nothing, then that's that. What did your supervisors and professors, and what was the understanding then, and what is it now, and how close are we to filling the gap and bridging that to where it should be?
The answer to your original question is 0. We were taught nothing about those. Nothing. I mean, there was not a discussion of the endocannabinoid system. So things have to arrive in science, be played out in science, and then finally make their way to textbooks, right? That's how this happens. And last I heard, I think the APA, American Psychiatric, and also the American Psychological are writing textbooks. When will they get adopted to medical schools? Unsure. That's why a lot, I have spoken at a number of medical schools and residencies. And that's what I like. A big part of what I want with the PMA is having that's why we let students in for free, because we're like, please go to your administration and beg them to teach you about psychedelics, beg them to have us on to teach you about psychedelics, anything that can like open your eyes, because in this day and age, there's so much information online. Like if they just sign up for the PMA, great, then they're doing better than anybody from my medical school class would ever have been doing, because we learned absolutely nothing. Right. So that's, I don't know the timeline for when that's going to be adopted, but that's, and also the issue is, right, like we were talking about, this evolves so quickly that textbook they write this year will be obsolete next year. The textbook can cover what we know about, 5-HT2A receptors, but we don't, and it can cover some of the depression trials, but we don't even have, 3-year data on a lot of these, right? Everything is so new. So it's part of the difficulty. So before it gets to textbooks, if you out there are running a residency or you're working at a medical school, please write to me and we will do a talk. We will, get your, residents can come in for a very reduced price to the PMA. Like we will send them information every month that at least gets them started thinking about psychedelics. But something I always say, if medical students are interested in this, is that if you're looking at a residency and maybe you're looking at going into psychiatry specifically, try to find a residency that will give you credit for doing a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy training. Like if you're going to get CAP trained, might as well get residency credit for it. Why wouldn't you want to come out of residency? Residency, by the way, if you don't know, is where you you go into residency as just a regular doctor and then you leave as a specialist, right? So if you go into your, I think it's maybe a 3 or 4 year psychiatry residency program, wouldn't it be nice to come out with the additional tools of having psychedelic assisted psychotherapy skills if that's something that you're interested in. So look at that. Ask if you can do a rotation in a ketamine clinic. Like there are ways that you can enrich your own residency training. But on the flip side, I met a residency program director in Denver, and I was like, please, I will come give and whatever talk to your group. I already actually had to Colorado's psychiatry residency, University of Colorado. So any opportunity that anybody working in medical education has, please, get the word out, because it's just not, I don't think it's in textbooks yet, and it may be some time before it gets there.
Yeah, that's really important. I know a lot of social workers are doing their internships in ketamine clinics because they can do that.
Yeah.
You're working with mental health, and that's awesome. And I know of in Canada, Victoria Island University, they have psychedelic medicine as part of the curriculum there, which is awesome.
Yes.
So they're definitely ahead of the time there. One part of training that we're interested here at Psychedelics Today that we have as part of our Vital course is experiential training. And I know last time we spoke, I can't remember the analogy that we used. It was, what was it? Like you wouldn't fly in an airplane if the pilot hadn't flown a plane. What was it? Do you remember what the analogy was?
I don't. Our
I'm
chat was like
butchering
a
it.
year ago. I wish my memory were that good. But I mean, that is the eternal debate. And I think there are two sides, right? And I just saw this play out in the comments on an Instagram post, which is where everything plays out, right? There's, absolutely, I think it would be advisable for somebody to have had an altered state of consciousness. That can be breath work, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you've done psychedelics. Would I love to, in some ideal world, say like, yes, if you're going to do psychedelic therapy, you should absolutely have taken psychedelics. Yes, but that's also an ableist thing to say, because for the same reason that I 100% support the production of non-hallucinogenic psychedelics for those whose medical conditions prohibit them from having a trip, from having a hallucination, I think that they should have access to whatever physiologic healing those psychedelics can still bring. And for that same reason, if we say you have to have had a psychedelic journey to be a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist, we are cutting off that same segment of the population for whom a trip is not advisable. And that's not the world I want to live in. So I definitely, and I'm hoping that the people for whom a trip is not advisable through psychedelics, that some kind of altered state of consciousness through a float tank or through breath work or something is accessible to them. Because absolutely, like I said, ideally, yes, you would like your patients to know what you're going through. Oh, I think it might have actually been that, there is the analogy where like, yeah, we'd want them to have flown the plane, but there's the also flip side, which is I don't insist that my doctor have taken penicillin before that doctor gives me penicillin. They don't have to, know what every treatment feels like to, this is obviously different, right? Not a one-on-one, but, I don't insist that every psychiatrist has taken their pretty mind-altering, Lexapro or gabapentin or whatever they're prescribing to know. But think about kind of the same thing is like, if a doctor is giving out a lot of antidepressants, they've never taken one, they may not know the mental effects, but they also may not really understand the depth of how bad some of the side effects might be, right? Like loss of libido or weight gain or whatever the side effects are. So obviously in every case, a practitioner is going to be better if they have some firsthand experience of what the patient is going through. I think that would be hard to argue with. But I just also think on the flip side that like to make actual psychedelic experience required is going to leave people out. And, like you said, we have just for everybody to be included is important. And also we have a therapist shortage, right? So to say, well, you have maybe a first degree relative with bipolar. And so it's not necessarily, 100% safe for you to do this thing. And then they don't get to be a therapist and share that would be unfortunate too. So that's kind of my complex thought on the situation.
Thank you for sharing that complexity. It is complex. And yeah, a couple of ideas that I've got is, I know Rick Doblin said a while back, I don't know if it's changed, but the label that they're going to put on MDMA that hopefully the FDA will approve will include, a line about practitioners will be allowed to have an experience themselves as part of their training. And it's interesting, Oregon, which we've been talking about, that's part of the training is 40 hours practicum to include some kind of experiential training and experiences with non-ordinary states of consciousness, which could be breathwork or meditation or ketamine, psilocybin. And so, yeah, it definitely helps.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate that it might not be right for everyone, and not everyone needs it that works in a hospital. Like the receptionist might not need it, or whoever works in billing and coding might not need it. But yeah, for that person that's maybe there sitting with someone for 6 hours using psilocybin, yeah, probably a bit of meditation might help, of breath work, or maybe even something's a bit stronger.
Right.
All right, Lynn Marie, we are at the top of the hour. So I wanted to ask one other question, another project that you're involved in, because you like to stay busy, and that's Sana Symposium. I didn't go to the last one. I think it's an online event, and there's one coming up, I think, at end of year. Can you just tell folks a wee bit about what it is and who it's for, and how it's shaping up this year?
I really appreciate you asking about that. Yes, so the Sana Symposium is the Psychedelic Medicine Association's official yearly conference. It is virtual for the third year in a row this year. I still have fingers crossed that it becomes in person some year, but with the amount of psychedelic conferences we have to go to in the second half of the year, maybe this is better. We squeezed it in between horizons this year, but the Sana Symposium is put on by HMP Global, which is the same people who do Psych Congress. They put on all kinds of congresses. So this is a really well done, not that I'm biased, but really well done conference. And it is geared toward clinicians. There are a number, I think you get like 12 or so CME, CE credits for this course. And it is kind of the best of the best. It is highly curated. And these are clinically applicable topics, just like we try to focus on in the PMA. But imagine you get 3 days of the world's experts telling you the latest on what you can apply today, what will be applicable soon. And yeah, the steering committee is a who's who, right? You've got Robin Carhart Harris, Rick Doblin, Andrew Penn, Charles Raison. I'm Kwasi Adusei. Adusei, I believe I pronounced that wrong. Sorry, Kwasi. It's people from across, names you've seen, names that you've had on this podcast, right? People from across the field doing the research, doing the clinical work. It's real. I mean, yes, I am wildly biased, but also I've been to a lot of conferences, and as a clinician, it's kind of like a roller coaster. This one's clinically applicable. This next talk isn't. Sana Symposium, from start to finish is clinically applicable, high quality, very well vetted. This is not a pay to play situation. We want to make sure that the people who sign up for this are really getting their time and money's worth. And so, sanasymposium.com is where you can find that. It's
beautiful.
I believe,
and just
end
the
of
dates
October.
again.
The October,
okay.
It's like October, I think 26th through 8th. And forgive me if I've botched that, but yes, it's in late October. Definitely go sign up for that. Oh, by the way, PMA members get a discount, which you all should know about. So check your emails. But it has been a massive honor. I just will say this in case anybody is listening, but massive honor that they reached out to the Psychedelic Medicine Association when we were just months old and said, can we be your official meeting? And nothing has been kind of a bigger boon for us to have such a professional conference partner with us. Yeah, awesome. We love them.
Awesome. And I'm just thinking, actually, speaking of conferences, we didn't meet in Denver, but I think we're going to meet in Tel Aviv.
That is the goal.
In December. Yeah.
let's put that out there.
I'm moving to Israel pretty soon, a couple of months, and that's going to be my new home. And yeah, there's a conference in December 10th to the 13th in psychedelic medicine. So yeah, I'd love to see you there, Lynn Marie. Are you definitely going, or still kind of weighing things up?
I mean, I really hope that my proposal is accepted. That will lean us much more toward yes. But I have been working for a company out of Tel Aviv since 2019 on the side, and so I would love to meet my bosses in person. That would be great. And I've wanted to go to Israel forever. So 100%, I am at as much of a yes as the universe lets to be possible. And yeah, let's fingers crossed the proposal is submitted, and that will just cement it.
Amazing. Okay, I think it's going to happen.
All right.
Thank you, Lynn Marie. So just to kind of say toodaloo, tell folks, where they can find more about you, your podcast, PMA, the course that you've got.
Absolutely. Thanks. Well, we didn't talk much about the podcast, so I'll just talk about that first. Psychedelic Medicine Podcast. It's about 4 years old. We're on 137th episode. We are very nerdy and very specific. Just so in case right now in this talk, we talked about 100 million things. We are the if you just want to know the answer to one question, will ketamine help my alcohol use disorder? That's the podcast you're looking for. Every episode is very labeled with just one topic. So If you are looking for, Matt Johnson's research on psilocybin for depression, we've got an episode on that. We've got Rick talking MDMA for PTSD, all of those kinds of subjects. Recently we did psychedelics for substance use disorder with Kevin Franciati, all kinds of...
That was amazing, by the way. I listened to that. Oh, wow. That was awesome.
Thank you. Kevin is he's a mastermind, Kevin from Psychedelics in Recovery. It was it's just a pleasure to have like the person doing the research or the person who's like lived that experience and run something to come on and just talk about that topic and like give us just a knowledge dump for that, 40 minutes or whatever. So yeah, if that's your jam, and thank you for being a listener to the podcast, David, always appreciated. So you can find that on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all the places. And that's the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast. And then the Psychedelic Medicine Association is at psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. As we discussed earlier, any clinician can join. If you have a license to do basically anything in the medical or therapy counseling fields, please join us. We would absolutely love to have you. That's also where you can find our course, which now you can buy just a course plus membership combo, and the Sauna Symposium at the end of October, saunasymposium.com. And our CME course, like I said, Managing Medical Risk for Patients Seeking Psilocybin Therapy, you can find as well at psychedelicmedicineassociation.org.
That's a wrap. Beautiful, Lynn Marie. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Hope you had a good time. Was that enjoyable on your end, Lynn Marie?
With you, it's always a blast, David. Always a pleasure to be on here.
Yeah, we always have a good time. Awesome. Well, thank you. And yeah, please God, we get to see each other in person pretty soon.
I wish the same as well. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lynn Marie. God bless. Take care, everybody. Bye.